We are talking about the Gospel of Mark, and we're in the end of the 6th chapter. And I've said this now, how many, this is 7th. This is a 7th meeting, so I have said it at least 6 times. What's the most important verse in the Gospel of Mark?
First
verse. And why is the first verse so important?
Because it tells you who Jesus is.
It tells you who Jesus is, and it tells you exactly how Mark's going to describe Jesus. It tells you what he's writing, and what is Mark writing?
About the
good news.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Alan. He's writing the good news. He's writing Evangelion, victory. He's not writing biography. He is writing gospel. And gospel is different. This is good news. This is why people should be excited about Jesus. You know, this is what Jesus has accomplished eternally, not just the facts of his life. So that's really, I think, important for us to remember. And that's why when you compare different gospels, evangelions, they are approaching it in different ways. Because Matthew sees the good news, the reason why Jesus is important to the future, in ways that are different than Mark sees it, than Luke sees it, certainly than John sees it. All of them are seeing the victory in Jesus in a slightly different way. And therefore they're shaping the story to emphasize why they think Jesus is so important to the future. If they weren't doing it, then we could have one biography and just leave it at that. But we don't. We have 4 Gospels, each of them saying why Jesus is important in a slightly different way. Okay, so we've got Gospel is one. We know the protagonist, because as I've said before, I think it's best if you read it as sort of a self-contained story. You know, we don't need to bring other stuff in. You know, if Mark wants us to know, Mark will tell us. You know, and he's writing, you know, a narrative. So we've got it's a narrative about Jesus, so I'm using sort of a literary term, a protagonist, and that's what Jesus is in the story of Mark. He's sort of the hero. And Mark tells us right in the first verse 2 things about Jesus. He uses 2 titles that not only describe why he's good news, why he's a good news, but gives us the structure for the rest of the gospel. And what is it that he says? He says this is a gospel of Jesus, and I think if the Greeks use punctuation, and the ancient Greek papyri that we have use punctuation, there'd be a colon there, because now follows 2 titles. What are the 2 titles?
the Son of God.
He's the Son of God is one, and Christ is the other. Christos is Son of God. And those are the 2 titles he gives. And if you look at the Gospel of Mark, the first half Mark writes about how Jesus is the Christ, and ends it, Peter at Caesarea Philippi, we'll look at it next week, when Peter says,
He is the Son of God.
well, it doesn't say you are the Son. He says you are the Christ.
Christ.
You know, okay, Mark has accomplished. You know, it took him, 8 chapters, but he's explained how Jesus is Son of God. Then the whole gospel changes, the mood changes, because Jesus starts doing something he's never done before, and he starts talking about suffering. And the second half, he's sort of talking about Son of God, and that ends when the centurion at the cross says, truly he's the Son of God. And so that's what I love Mark. His structure is so clean. You know, we've got one section ending when Mark tells the reader, I've accomplished it, Peter knows who he is. I've given you enough information to know what the Christ is, because Peter knows. Now I'm going to give you information about Son of God, and I've accomplished that when the centurion says, Son of God. So it's really, really clean. I love Mark. So anyway, that's what we got. And so right now he's establishing what? Mark is establishing Jesus as the Christ. Right? And what are some of the things that we've seen that sort of establish, because they're all kind of alike. None of them have to do with suffering. You know, none of the things he's dealt with has to do with suffering or bad things. You know, they're all good. What would be the word, Barb, and this is your word. What is the word? Yes. What's the word? Authority! Boom, 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 boom. Over and over again. We got Jesus. Christ is the one who has authority. And he has authority over
Everything.
everything. What are some examples that he's given?
Demons.
Demons he has authority over. Now,
Sickness.
interesting with demons. When he casts out demons, ooh, they know who he is. No human being in Mark is said. We're going to look at a passage where, and we're going to just mention a difference between Matthew and Mark. But no human being has said, you are the Son of God. But demons know. And Jesus immediately says to them,
Shut up.
shut up. Shut up.
Well,
So he has,
quiet is better.
because well, you know, and you say it in King James language, it sounds good. But he says shut up because, and why would he say shut up?
He doesn't want anybody to know.
He doesn't want, because if they knew now, they'd assume Son of God is doing miracles, you know, doing all this stuff. That's what it means to be Son of God. Well, it doesn't, not for Mark. For Mark, being the Son of God means suffering and dying for you. That's what it means to be Son of God. And you're going to miss that. You're going to miss it if you put the title, if Mark puts the title right here. At least in his mind. You know, that's not the case with Matthew at all. You know, and certainly not with John. You know, they have a different perspective. But Mark, this isn't something people are supposed to know at this point in the story. Okay, so he's casting out demons. What else is he doing? Showing authority.
Healing.
Man, he's healing right and left. What else is he doing?
Calling the disciples.
He's called his disciples, and when he says, follow me, what do?
Immediately.
Immediately, thank you, because that's one of Mark's favorite words. Everything is immediate. They immediately follow him. What else?
Calms the storm.
He calms the storm. Oh, we're going to see that again. You know, we're going to see calming the storm part 2 today. So he calms the storm, and symbolically that's really important, because in the ancient world, water is a symbol of chaos. And when you can still the water, man, you are stilling the chaos. Because remember, in the beginning of Genesis, the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the deep, which means when God said, let there be light, he wasn't calling light into a void. He was calling light into water, the face of the deep. There was water at the beginning, and God brings order out. Symbolically, that makes a lot of sense. You know, bringing order out of chaos. But Jesus can still storm. He has authority over the chaos, right? So we've seen all of that. Now, before we look at this, we've got Jesus, and all of this is Mark establishing who Jesus is as a Christ. Someone who has
Authority.
Thank you very much. That was. It's good that this is your word, because, and I want you to claim it. When I would teach in the Bible studies, and where at Cove, had of course a group, and when you get a group, you keep a group. You know, they come and listen to you. And one woman in the group, her word, your word is authority. Her word became, and it's not nearly as good, circumcision. So whenever we were at circumcision, you know, you'd pause and I'd look at Chris and she'd say circumcision. You know, and we did that for years and years and years. So lucky you got authority. Yeah, better than circumcision. All right. So, but maybe later. So we've got that now. We've got characters.
One more.
What's that?
He raised the dead.
He raises the dead, or
brings them back.
yes, yeah. I was going to say resuscitate, and you're right. Raising the dead is right, but it isn't the general resurrection. You know that Mark's going to deal with at the end of his gospel, but he certainly resuscitates the dead. And that becomes kind of interesting. So he has authority over life and death. My gosh, this is a guy that's got real power, right? Mm-hmm. Now, as we've done that, and all of this is working with Mark's perception of Christ. Now, that's how we're understanding Mark's understanding. That's how we're understanding. That's good phrasing. That's kind of confusing. We don't want to open up a dictionary and say, "Ooh, Christ, ooh, this is what it means," and assume that Mark is using the same dictionary. Mark defines his own words. And this seems to be the way he defines what it means to be Christ. Now, if we look someplace else, they might define it in a slightly different way because Mark is one person, Matthew's another. So it doesn't mean they're using the identical definitions. We look inside the gospel to see how words are defined. But we've got Jesus is the Christ, doing Christ things, at least in Mark's mind. Now we also have characters introduced. And in fact, outside of some individuals that we're going to see later, little individuals, we've got the big characters already introduced in the story. Mark introduces them really early. Like any good writer, when you're reading a novel or watching a movie, you don't want a character introduced, a major character in the last, half hour. You want them introduced early. So we've got and Mark has even told us where they stand. So we've already said Jesus, let's say Jesus is over here. Who else has Mark introduced?
The apostles.
We got the apostles. And where are the apostles standing? Okay, on the Jesus side. Okay, if there's a divide here, we got Jesus and his apostles / disciples, because for Mark, he kind of uses that word interchangeably. In Greek, it means something slightly different. Luke really specifies the difference between the two groups, but Mark, it's sort of kind of blends them together a little bit, which is okay. So we've got Jesus and the apostles, disciples over here. Who else have we introduced?
Pharisees.
Ooh, everybody do this. Boo, boo. Okay, so the Pharisees, we got boo. So we got the Pharisees, and the Pharisees are the bad guys. If Jesus is the protagonist, they are the antagonists. They are the ones, they are the fly in the ointment. They are the problems, right? And why do they... And again, I keep on saying this because this is really important from Mark's perspective. Why ultimately do they oppose Jesus? In Mark's mind, not historically, but in Mark's mind, why do they oppose Jesus? What does he want his audience to believe?
Fear.
Is the reason. Well, fear, I agree, fear. But Mark is very specific on why they end up deciding this guy's got to die.
He works on Sunday.
Well, okay, in particular, does one on Sunday?
He
Works.
That's good.
That's it! Ed does good on Sunday. And, all the other things you said are right. He heals on Sunday, he works on Sunday, all of that's right. But as Mark phrases it, he does good on the Sabbath, and doing good breaks their law. And then we, the readers, say, well, that is one screwed up law. So Mark does not want, and we'll see it in what we're reading today, he does not want us to be sympathetic towards at least how the Jewish law is being read. He doesn't want us to feel it could be good, it's sort of helpful sometimes. He doesn't want us to feel that way. Now, that's okay, that's his opinion. Other writers view it different, slightly different. But that's Mark. He does good on the Sabbath, and that's when they finally get together and decide to kill him. And so they are over here. Now we got the protagonists, we've got the antagonists, and who do we have in the middle? We have the crowds. And the crowds are doing what? Nothing. The crowds are...
Having free meals.
Yeah, they're getting free meals. They're getting healing. They're sort of in the middle. They're always in the background, but they're there. And the Greek word for crowd is aklos. And when he deals with the crowds, when he's dealing with the crowds, and I've said it before, you view them as like an organism. They're not individuals in the crowds. They are like an organ. The crowds always do the same thing. It's like in mass.
School of fish.
What's that?
School of fish.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You don't look at the individuals. You look at the whole. And the whole always acts. And that's going to be important later because, the crowd as a mass is going to do something at the end. But we're not even close to that now. All we know is the crowds in the background, although we've gotten hints that the crowd, because when he heals somebody that's in from the crowd, he says, don't do it, and they do it. Don't tell anybody, but they end up telling everybody. So they don't listen to him, but they're there. And eventually, later, we're going to find out that the Pharisees are scared to death of the crowds because the Pharisees don't know where they stand. And they're afraid, we're going to find out where they stand. But we're not there yet. Okay, so we've done all of that. We are kind of getting close to the ending of this first section. We'll end it next week. And so what we've got is Jesus really still doing the stuff he's done and showing his authority. We also looked at, when we talked last week, one of the things that as you read it, don't think about what's happening in the story itself. And again, we're not supposed to be in the story, we're observing it. Because we know things people in the story don't know, like motivations and thoughts and feelings. They don't know that. We do. We also hear God's voice and demons' voice and stuff. But think about, Mark is writing this to a church. A struggling little church, somewhere around 70, 75, and they're so small the Romans don't even notice them yet. And they're struggling, and they expected Jesus to come back, and he hasn't come back, and, they're getting discouraged, and they're facing a lot of opposition by scribes and Pharisees, because those are the only Jews left. And so he's kind of giving them encouragement. You want to think about as you read, now how would a church like that hear what Mark is saying, how he's shaping the story, how it's good news to them, and then we can say and try to apply it to us. We can kind of claim it and apply it to us. So, and that's been the case in everything we've looked at, certainly in what we're looking at today. Okay, we are in chapter 6, verse 30. What's happening in verse 30?
The apostles have gathered around Jesus.
Okay, we got apostles gathering, and what are the apostles doing?
Reporting to him.
What they did.
They are reporting what they did. What they did.
When they sent
Oh,
them
I
out.
forgot all about that. He
Talk
forgot.
about it,
Oh,
that's
man.
right.
He sent them out, didn't he? That whole thing about John the Baptist threw me there for a minute. I got all fired up about Herod and Herodias and dancing and all kind of stuff. Oh, I forgot all about this. Yeah, he did send them out. And he sent them out to do what?
To cast out demons.
To cast out demons.
Heal.
Teach.
And to heal and to teach, right? So he's sent them out, and what, like any good writer, he sent them out, and then we have this little episode about Herod and John the Baptist. It's interesting, sort of a way, I think, to get John completely out of the picture before we get into Son of God. So John as a figure is now gone, and we're not going to hear John anymore. He's history in Mark. But so they've come back, they're reporting, and after they report, what do they end up doing? So we got this little transition.
rest.
Okay, he says, let's go, right? And we need to
Rest.
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 We need some R&R. Okay, so he's going, and where do they go?
And about in a
To
solitary place.
a deserted place, a desert, a wilderness.
Yeah.
So, that's a loaded term, Old Testament, He's going in a wilderness. That's kind of interesting. If he says, we got to go, guys, we got to go to chill. We're going to go and chill for a while.
We'll go to the farm.
What's that?
We'll go to the farm.
Right. Well, he doesn't mention taking what with him?
Food.
Food. Yeah, it doesn't take if they're going to rest. He doesn't say we're going to go and pray. He says we need to rest. We need to chill. But he doesn't mention taking any
Yeah, and they're hungry.
food with them. All right, well, they're not the only ones. Okay, so they go, and what happens as they go?
The crowd runs ahead of him and meets him when he gets there.
Okay, you got the crowd coming in. Now, Mark doesn't tell us why, but we know this isn't something that, this has happened before. So what we've got is the crowds coming to Jesus, right? And what is Jesus' response? When he
felt sorry
sees
for
all
them.
this crowd,
He felt sorry
he feels compassion for them. And why does he feel compassion?
because they're like a sheep without a leader.
Okay, like sheep with which kind of paints what picture? What kind of picture do we have if he sees, and again, it's the aklos.
A pastoral.
Yeah, kind of a pastoral thing. Jesus is as a shepherd, and these are sheep, and we all know. Has anybody ever worked with sheep? Lived around
dumb.
sheep? Lord have mercy.
They're dumb.
They are dumb.
They run right
You
through
know.
the fence. They
Oh.
are really dumb.
They are really dumb. You know, and they are dumb. And I'll tell you, I taught 8th graders at one time, and sheep are dumber, than a bunch of class full of 8th graders. They really are. But then 8th graders would run into a fence.
Yeah.
So you can't. But they are dumb. But kind of hang together, and you kind of. So but he feels the key is feeling compassion for him. And so even though we've got the crowd out here, we got a little clue. Again, Mark's kind of dropping in because he doesn't have to write this that Jesus feels compassion. That's Mark's writing this. That we get a little idea of the crowd. So as we think about the crowd in the future, we're going to take Jesus' perspective when they come up. Well, they're like sheep. Not the sharpest knives in the drawer, but certainly sympathetic, not antagonistic. Okay, so he feels, and he begins to teach him, right? And what happens as he's teaching him?
It gets later.
Okay, it gets later and later and later, which is hard for you to believe that a minister would start talking and talking and talking and not stop.
I would never believe that.
Wouldn't it? That's the most shocking thing and unrealistic.
Yes.
Because we're always brief.
Yes.
Right? We never just run on.
Of course not. I don't think they believe you.
I don't think so either.
You used to have some credibility.
That reminds me, when I was much younger and single, I was out in Montana, and I would pick a lady, and she was married to a lawyer and had a big law office in Bismarck, North Dakota, and we go to meetings in the eastern part of North Dakota, and I was coming from Montana, so it's a long drive. Go to eastern meetings, or western Minnesota, Red River Valley, and I would pick her up to go to Presbyterian meetings. And I was single at the time, and I remember her name was Marty Chapman, and I picked her up, and as we were driving, she said her husband, I can't remember her husband's name, and she said, well, my husband, hired a new lawyer in his law firm. He was a partner at a law firm, a young lady just out of law school, and we were talking that maybe you'd like to
Date her.
Maybe you'd like to meet her, or her husband suggested, well, maybe Ed would like to. Maybe we can introduce her to Ed, and Marty, and this is Marty telling me. She said, I told him no, it wouldn't work. She, this new lawyer, she likes sincerity.
You poor baby. You felt so bad, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I told her I can be sincere. If you give me warning, I can be sincere.
No wonder.
And this wasn't even my hometown. Lord have mercy. Okay, anyway, they come, and the disciples come to him because he's been on and on and on. And what do they say? What do they say to him? To Jesus?
Send them away because they got to eat.
Yeah, they got to eat. We've been here. Yeah, that's right. We haven't. There's fast food in the village. They gotta get something to eat. And Jesus tells them,
You have to give them something.
go ahead, knock yourself out. You give them something to eat. Now, and what do they say?
We don't have enough money to do that.
Yeah. They say it's going to cost
8 months' wages.
Yeah.
It's going to cost a bunch of money.
It's a lot to throw a party.
Yeah. A denarii is a day. That's what the story about denarii. Working for that's a day's wage. That's a lot of money, and that's just to buy bread. It didn't even mention peanut butter or venison sausage. It's none of that stuff. Now it's really interesting. Again, since I believe, and I think I think it's right. That's what I believe in. I think the other evangelists had Mark in front of them. So when you see one gospel changing parallel stories, you start thinking, well, why would they do that? What would motivate Matthew or Luke to change something in Mark? Yeah, why would they change even a detail? Why would they change a detail? And in Matthew, the parallel of Matthew, he doesn't mention anything about money. So that makes it kind of interesting. Why would Matthew do that? Take out this money idea. Why would Mark have the money in there? What point do you think he's making by saying, man, it's going to cost a lot of money to feed?
It takes a lot of power.
It takes a lot of power, yeah. So it's kind of emphasizing the amount. Evidently, Matthew didn't see that as important. And remember, papyrus is expensive. So if you could cut one word, that's a good thing. It's going to save you, space. So they've got an incentive to cut the stories down just to serve space. So if Matthew doesn't see it as important, he'll take it out. And both Matthew and Luke eliminate the idea of buying bread. They don't even mention it.
Where do they get their wages?
Well, a lot of them were day laborers. A lot of them were. It was an interesting thing. And there's a parable in Matthew about landowners hiring people to work on their land. And you had big estates, big land holdings. You had some subsistence farming, but you had big estates. And they were day laborers.
Oh.
A lot of them were day laborers. And you worked and you got paid enough to eat
One day.
that day. And a denarii would feed you and your family that day. And that was it. You didn't have anything for the next day. It's not like you could buy your weekly groceries. You better get a job the next day or you don't eat. And that's one of the reasons, just as an aside, because we run into this, and people, modern Christians, we tend to misinterpret it. Children were not viewed as cute and cuddly and wonderful blessings of God. Not until they could start earning money. In the ancient world, a child was a mouth. And children had to eat and brought in nothing. They were a drain on the family. Now they weren't putting them on the mountainside and, killing them. But they were a drain. And so they were on the lowest, and most of them didn't make it to 5. So they were on the lowest level of society, children. So when you see about Jesus welcoming the children, I see pictures, of Jesus, and he's playing with the kids and then, dancing around and having a good, kids were not viewed as, they were not important. They were right up there with widows. And widows weren't viewed as important either because they were drains on society because they weren't able to work the vineyards, or work the fields.
Society wouldn't continue without kids.
Well, that's right. And that's why you produced a lot of them, hoping that some would make it to age. And when they were old enough to work, then you were good. Then you were happy. But until they were able to work, that's just the way it was. So a lot of times when Jesus talks about welcoming children, he's talking about those low, not those who are cute and innocent and sweet. That's not a first century view of childhood. Not for poor people. Maybe for the rich, but not for the poor. All right. But that's just an aside. Anyway, they got to get something to eat, right? And they say, he says, go and do it. And they say, man, it's going to cost a fortune. And Jesus says, well, I'll tell you what I want you to do. This is what I want you to do.
Find something.
See what's out there. Right? Canvas. See what's out there. And then so they go out and see. And then come back and they say, what? What have they found?
5 loaves of bread.
5 loaves, 2 fish. Now, 5 loaves, 2 fish. That's kind of interesting. 5 loaves, 2 fish.
7 complete.
Thank you. 7. Ancient world. Perfect numbers. 7's a perfect number. It's a prime number. The 7s are perfect. So it's very interesting. We got 5 and 2 make 7. So we got this number that signifies some kind of idea of perfection. And then what does Jesus have them do?
Groups them in groups of 50.
Now, why is he doing that? Why is he grouping them in groups of 150? Some people some of the audience is going to say, oh, I'm experiencing deja vu. Groups of 50, 150. I think I've heard that somewhere before. Somebody else did that. Grouped people in, or divided people. Moses did, yes, sir. Moses did this. So this is a little, Mark is dropping in this little Moses reference. So even though Jesus has had hostility with the scribes and the Pharisees, this is a little Moses reference, which becomes kind of interesting. So he does this, and then what does Jesus do?
He took the 5 loaves.
He takes the 5 loaves, and he takes the 2 fish, and he prays, and then he does what?
Sends them out with baskets
Well,
to feed them.
he breaks the loaves and gave it to his disciples to distribute. He took the bread, and after he broke it, he gave it to his disciples to distribute to the crowds.
How many pieces do you think each one of the disciples got, and how far did that piece go to have so much left over?
Yeah. Is it just me, or am I hearing something else in this that sounds familiar? He took the bread, and after he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it to his disciples.
Communion.
Shelley, that'll be your word.
Okay.
Communion. And see, again, lucky. Because the alternative
But
isn't great.
it's also like planting too.
Wait, okay.
Because each of the disciples gave to a whole bunch of
Sure,
people.
right. Which is kind of interesting if you take that image and apply it to communion too. Why do you think, because this is Mark writing it. I mean, this isn't, he's choosing the words to use. And this really sounds like a ritual. He took the bread, he blessed it, he broke it. Sure sounds like communion. Sure sounds like, according to Paul, that's what they were doing. In 1 Corinthians, churches were practicing communion because he was the one that said, on the night in which he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and broke it again. So these were words that the church followed because this was a practice. Why do you think Mark would structure this in a way that sure sounds like communion? What is Mark maybe doing for his audience?
He's telling them that communion is important with God.
Okay. Yeah. And he's great. This is a good grounding for communion. That this is, that's just not something we made up. There's a grounding here, and he's going to ground it even stronger later when they have the meal. But he's grounding it earlier and associating it with miraculous. And I think that's great. I think that's a good observation about planning. That he's grounding it in something that is distributed and can create more. Can bear fruit. So I think that's really good. So he does that, and everybody is filled. Everybody is filled.
Wow. Immediately.
5,000 of them.
Whoa! Everybody is filled. They could come back for seconds, And what happens at the end?
They had leftovers.
There's leftovers. How many leftovers?
12
baskets.
12.
Twice man.
Whoa, 12. That sounds, man, you think that's significant? The 12 baskets?
I believe it is.
I believe it is too. What makes those 12 baskets significant?
12 tribes.
12 tribes. Oh. So he has fed all these people, and there's enough for
5,000.
the 12 tribes. Symbolically, oh man, this is Mark's audience hearing this. They'd say, oh, that's really impressive. But 12 tribes, not 11 baskets, not 13 baskets, but
There's
12.
enough for everybody.
What's that?
There's
Enough for everybody, including God's people. Wow, we're going to see a second feeding. Watch for the number of baskets left over the second feeding. That's very interesting. So he feeds it with all this left over, the 12, kind of symbolically resignates. Thank you very much. Yeah. How many are fed?
5,000.
5,000.
Oh,
That's
no,
only
more
the
than
men.
that.
And that's men, that's right. You got women there, and we all know how much, no, I'm not even gonna go there.
They have power.
Yeah, because we are hopelessly outnumbered.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so
Well,
so
then
it
we have
wasn't
to work
that much
harder to
because,
get more men here.
because men are, pigs. We're pigs, we just eat all we can get. But there's plenty of food
Don't you
there.
think it's interesting that the children also had enough to eat?
Well,
Because in their society, they probably were hungry a lot.
yeah. Yeah.
Satisfied is a big word.
Yeah, they were all hungry.
Yeah.
We forget that this was the world, well, we forget because we live in America.
Yeah, yes.
PTL. We live in America because we are seldom around this table. If I'm hungry, it's by choice or neglect. In this world, they were hungry by necessity. They didn't have a choice. And most of the world we live in, people are hungry by necessity because they don't have a choice. They're surviving. And we sometimes kind of forget that. And that's why the Magnificat that Mary says in Luke, will fill the hungry with good things and pull the mighty from their thrones. That becomes such a powerful message that resonates in the ancient world because that's what the people want to hear. That they're going to be satisfied. They won't be hungry anymore. And the people that have more than enough. Well, the story of Lazarus and the rich man.
It's
too.
interesting that it's Jesus who satisfies.
Right. Yeah, you're right. That's right. It's the satisfaction. It's coming through him, and it's a physical satisfaction. And we really don't want to spiritualize it because they are physically being fed.
Yes.
Yeah, which I think becomes really important.
I think part of it too is that he preaches to them first because number one is your spiritual. Christ is more important with your spirituality rather than feeding you physically, but
Right.
spiritually.
Right.
So he does that first and then he feeds them.
That's a great point. Yeah, that he's nurtured them in both ways, but he started with their spirit and their mind because he's teaching them.
Many things.
yeah, it's teaching them many
what
things.
the many things were. How come we never get that?
You know why? Because Mark doesn't consider it important.
Oh.
Yeah, if Mark considered it important, he'd have given it to us, but he doesn't. Okay, so he's done this miracle that shows he has, Barb, what?
Authority.
Thank you very much. What happens in the evening?
What happens what?
In the evening. So he's done
He
this
sends-
miracle. Mark is ready to move on to the other story.
He sends-
And by the way, when you run into these stories in the Gospels, they are called, and you may run across this word, they're called pericopes. And a pericope is just a little incident, that you see in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All the little stories, that run, 10 verses, 20 verses, those are called pericopes, little stories. You don't see them in John. John doesn't use pericopes. He has other things. He doesn't use little stories that are sort of tied together, but the other ones do. Okay, so we finished that pericope, that little story. We're moving on to the next one. We got evening. He's alone. What's going on?
He sends his disciples to Bethesda ahead of him.
Okay.
He goes up on the mountain to pray.
Okay, so, and the disciple is where? He's sending him out where?
To
Boat.
He's on a boat.
Yeah.
They're going on a boat. Have we?
Immediately.
Yeah, immediately, which, Mark loves. Uthos. Have we seen something like this before? Disciples in a boat in the middle of the lake?
Yep.
But Jesus
Yeah.
was with them then. So
Yeah, that's right. He was sleeping on a pillow, as I recall.
Yeah, and the back of the boat.
Okay. And what happened in that storm?
There's a little bit of a storm.
Yeah, storm and
Big waves.
big waves. And what did Jesus do?
Calms the.
Calmed it. Okay.
Oh, he had to wake up first.
Had to wake up. They had to wake him up. Okay. So he's got something similar, right? The disciples on the mountain, only this time he's not there. He's on a mountain praying. And what happens when they're in the middle of the lake?
The wind was against them.
Oh, I'm experiencing deja vu all over again. We got wind and rain and all this kind of jazz. Difference is Jesus isn't
With him.
isn't with them. Now, this is one of those things, think, the story is interesting, there's a lot of stuff going to happen in this story, but think about how Mark's audience is hearing this. How are they, and whenever Mark's audience is listening to the story, they're identifying with what characters in the story?
The disciples.
They're identifying with the disciples because they see themselves as followers, or they're identifying with disciples. And how might they identify with disciples here?
They might feel that Jesus isn't with them right now.
And as they're living their lives in their little bitty church somewhere,
They're in the boat without.
they're in a boat, and the waters ain't still. They are in the midst of a storm. It sure looks like a storm. And, one story says Jesus is there with them, but doesn't seem to be concerned. Now, it seems like
Jesus isn't there.
he's not with them at all. They're alone. And if you're alone in the middle of a storm, how are you going to feel?
Scared.
You are going to be scared.
It's interesting that they were straining at the oars. They were struggling.
They were struggling. Geez, do you think Mark's church could identify with struggling in the
Yes.
world in which they live? Yeah, I think so. But what happens?
Jesus walks out on the lake.
He is walking on the sea. Whoa. Now, symbolically, because we've already talked about this before, water, and this is the ancient world, particularly around those who live close to the Mediterranean, water is a symbol of what?
Chaos.
It's a symbol of chaos. Always. Because you can't control the sea. You could have control over land, but you sure can't control water. And water is this wonderful, and they're in the midst of chaos in this boat. And what is Jesus doing?
Why
Walk
was,
on.
why was he going to walk by?
That's what I was going to ask you. It said right here. I said, because I write questions on my sheet. It says, what does Jesus intend to do?
We wanted to go.
Okay, walk by. And then I say, why would Jesus mention that? See, that's my question, right at the top of this page. Why would Jesus mention that?
Well, I'm sorry.
Just their faith. Maybe
Yeah.
one-
So but that's good. That means you're going the same direction that I'm going. Why would he do that?
He wants to test their faith.
Well, okay, yeah, it's maybe a test of, certainly a test of their faith. What is he telling? And again, we can look at this story, but we can also look at how Mark's church is hearing it, how we hear it, because we identify with disciples too.
Is that what we perceive he's doing? That he's going to be going by us, but when he sees we're in trouble, he comes back to us every time?
Okay, we got two things, right, that we're seeing. One, we see that Jesus can do what?
Walk on
Walk
water.
Walk on
water.
Which is on top of the chaos. The chaos will never overwhelm Jesus. No matter what it is, he's in control of that chaos. And even if it appears as though he's not there, he is. And his, what word? Barb.
Authority.
Authority, yeah. His authority is still there. His power is still there, even if the perception is he doesn't seem to be concerned. Same sort of thing you had in the boat when he was asleep. I was asleep, but don't be afraid. I'm here. It looks like I'm walking past you. Don't be afraid. I've still got authority.
And they thought he was a ghost.
Yeah, they thought he was a ghost, which shows, like we said, we saw a little glimpse of the crowd. We're seeing little glimpses of the apostles. They see him and they assume
It's supernatural.
it's supernatural, or he ain't real, or it's a ghost. They're not there yet. No matter how close they are to Jesus, they aren't getting it yet. Which is understandable because we haven't gotten to the Son of God part. But they think it's a ghost. What does it looks like? And they are feeling what?
Fear.
Terrified.
They are terrified. It's a different Greek word. They are terrified at what they're experiencing. No other way to translate it. Because Jesus is going to use
Are
a
they
different word in the next
terrified
verse.
because of the storm? Or because Jesus is more than they thought, it wasn't what he thought he was? We don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. 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 I think that's right. Both. I think both. A lot of things are going on. And I think Mark's a good enough writer that he wants his reader to say, put yourself into that situation. What's the nature of your terror? And this is terror. This isn't just being afraid. This is being terrified. And Jesus responds by saying what?
Take courage, it is I.
Take heart, it is I. Now, ooh, it is I. That sounds, ooh. You don't see this much in Mark. Go on me. In Greek, when Moses is before the bush, in the Septuagint, and God says from the bush, "Hi Moses, you need to do this," and Moses said, "I ain't doing it until you give me your name." They're going to ask who sent me, and from the bush, the voice comes, and this isn't in Hebrew, it's in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation. The voice says,
I am that I am.
Ago a me, I am, ago a me. And boy, that's powerful. So when a Jew hears ago a me in Greek, now that's Greek, that's the name for God. Now, Mark doesn't use that too much. Neither does Matthew and Luke. John uses it a lot. A lot. There's a lot of I am statements. I am the good shepherd. I am the way. All of them are go on me, go on me. A lot in John. But here, when Jesus says it, he's claiming a lot of authority. Clearly they don't get it yet. But we, the reader, are saying, geez Louise.
Can't see it.
Yeah. I think at different points, Mark wants us to look at the disciples and we want to grab them by the shoulders and say, "Don't you get this? What's wrong with you?" But they don't. They're kind of clueless in here. But we aren't, because we already know.
Well,
We
yeah.
are.
Yeah,
we
we're-
are.
What's that?
Every day in our life we go through this.
Yes,
thing.
that's right. That's right. And that we can take heart just like they can take heart. Even when it appears as though we're lost, we can still take it. But it's really interesting because he gets into the boat, and what happens? Wind stops. And they are astonished. We've run into that word over and over and over again. That's astonished. And it's interesting. The next verse 52, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because what does he say in verse 52? And understand, in the parallel story in Matthew doesn't include this. He changes it. This I find really interesting. What does Mark tell us in verse 52?
For they had not understood about the loaves.
They didn't understand the loaves, and their hearts
were hard.
were hardened. Now, that's interesting, because when he says their hearts were hardened, and we've talked about this before with verbs, what is the voice of that verb? Was hardened.
It was packed.
It's passive. It's a passive verb, which means they didn't harden their own hearts. Their hearts were
Done for them.
hardened by something else.
That's why.
Who hardens hearts?
God.
God hardens hearts. Divine passive. God hardened their hearts. Whoa! No wonder Matthew changed this. And by the way, Matthew changed it by them saying, "Oh, this is good." He gets into the boat and they say, "Truly he's the Son of God." In Matthew. Truly he's the Son of God. But not in Mark. Instead, in Mark, they don't understand the loaves, and we'll talk about that in a second. And God hardens their hearts. Now, why in heaven's name would God harden their hearts? Why wouldn't God open their hearts so they can receive this?
Because they weren't ready.
They weren't ready. They aren't ready because they haven't heard what?
The rest of
The Son of Man has to suffer. And as the Son of Man has to suffer, who else is going to suffer?
Everybody else.
You. That's part of following Jesus. And if they said, "Oh, they're Son of God." No. Because this has nothing to do with the Son of Man suffering. Has everything to do with the Son of Man showing what, Barb?
Authority.
Yes, not suffering. And that becomes, I think, really important. They're not ready for it yet. We can hear it, but they aren't ready for it. Now the question is, so that's why God would harden their hearts. So there's no chance of them saying what they say in Matthew. He's the Son of God. what's this thing? They don't understand the story of what happened with the loaves. What does this have to do with the loaves?
That Christ is enough.
I think so. That Jesus provides. That Jesus provides. That just like he did with the loaves to all those people on the storm, Jesus provides. They didn't understand. And that's okay. Because they're not.
We don't always.
Yeah, we don't either, and they're not ready for it. They have a good excuse. Because they haven't seen Jesus on the cross. So they don't understand that Jesus is going to suffer and die. We do. So we're in a better position to know who he is than they are. And I think that's Mark's point constantly. Don't feel that they have an advantage because they don't. You have the advantage because you know the story. They don't. They didn't know the story. John does the same thing. Kind of interesting. Okay, so anyway, these disciples are not showing what?
Trust.
They're not showing trust yet. They're just kind of reacting. They're with him, but they're not showing anything close to trust yet. And in fact, they can't really show trust because it's not their time. They haven't heard enough to make that
I
decision.
think it would be hard for them, being Jews in that time frame. They were looking for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and they have to be struggling in their mind that this is going to be a suffering Jesus. This is not going to be the King of Kings. That would be awful hard for them to make that transition.
I think you nailed it. I think that is exactly what Mark is getting at. That if you're flying, if all you can see is the Jesus that we've seen so far in Mark, you're flying with one wing.
Yeah.
You don't know the whole story. You don't know him. You don't know him. You know half of him, but half isn't enough. Half is going to lead you. Half is going to lead you to betray him, to deny him, and to run away. Knowing half the story is going to lead you to do that. Knowing the full story will enable you at the foot of the cross to say, that's the Son of God. But they're not there yet. They're not there yet.
I think in our Christian life, we accept the things Jesus does way before we accept him as our Lord and Master.
Oh yeah, I think so. Well, and if I believe that what you do with respect to Jesus changes your eternal destiny, man, I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure you do what's enough, right? And that may mean softening things. Am I going to say to you, you believe Jesus, but I'll tell you, it's going to be really hard. And you're going to suffer a lot. You're going to suffer more after than you did before. You want to believe?
No.
Heck no. Heck no. Nobody says, buy this product and your life will be worse.
Yeah.
Buy Progressive Insurance and we're going to screw you later. You don't do Geico because they always provide service, but we're not going to answer your calls. Have a good day. Now who's going to sign it? Only an idiot's going to sign it. So if we sell the gospel, we're going to lead to focusing on the Christ.
Yeah.
We're not going to focus on the Son of God.
And then once you've gotten there, you realize how important the other part is.
Exactly. But if somebody's going to also have to take you there, and I think that's dangerous when you present it and they say, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus. Well, after you said I believe in Jesus, okay, now let me tell you how hard it is. And then you start, well, why wasn't this? Sort of like the army recruiter. Why did you mention this?
Yeah.
Why didn't you mention this when you were recruiting me? And that's what Mark is saying.
Do you think that goes back to the planting of the seed part, where they like the parts that he does, but they're not ready to do the commitment for the work?
I think so. It's like somebody told me, and I believe it's work of Holy Spirit too. The ability to accept is work of Holy Spirit. It's not the work of my convincing you or my rhetoric. It's the work of Spirit guiding you. And I was talking to somebody the other day who said, well, why in heaven's name should I accept Jesus? Are you trying to convert me? I said, no, I'm not. I'm not trying it. I'm not. That's not my job. I'm going to share with you, if you're interested, I'll share with you why I believe. But I don't believe because the argument convinced me. I believe because I don't have a choice. I think the Holy Spirit touched me, opened my eyes and mind, and I can't not believe. I can't not believe. It's like the disciples when Jesus says to them in John, will you go too? And Peter says, where would we go? You have the words of eternal life. I can't not believe. I'm sorry. I just can't pull it off. And that's not my work. It's the work of the Holy Spirit. So I will share.
The fact that they suffer is proof that the gospel and the story that they're telling is true. Because they didn't gain anything from it. They actually got worse off and stuff, and the suffering and all that and stuff, which is one of the proofs that they really believe that Christ rose.
But you do, and yes, you do get something though, and that's the ability to look at the future with hope. To know that somebody controls your destiny who's greater than you. And that becomes the core. That you are not in control, God's in control, and that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
All right.
Okay.
Sorry, we gotta leave.
Yeah.
Bye.
I'm sorry I offended you today. And you're really, okay. Well, maybe next week. See, I told you, Van, not to say that. Okay, so okay. All right, so we've got this goal. We got one more story, right? One more pericope, because when they cross over there at a new place, right? And where are they now? In verse 53, they end up.
I can't pronounce Gennesaret.
Gennesaret. They're in Gennesaret.
Gennesaret. Oh.
Yeah, Gennesaret. And what's going on in Gennesaret? What is Jesus doing? Not a shocker.
People recognize him.
Oh, people recognize him. He's kind of a rock star now. What are they doing?
They ran there.
They ran there. Were they there
They're
healing? The sick. What a great crowd. That's always what I want. I want to go into a town and have a lot of sick people right in front of me. That's everybody who's sick. Come and see Ed. Cough, sneeze on him. That's good.
Still, those who are doing that really still don't believe who he is. They just want the healing part.
They want the healing. They're the crowds. And what is he doing? He's healing, which shows he has
Power.
Thank you very much. He has authority. And so he's doing all this stuff, and he's showing again, he's the Christ. This is what the Christ does, right? Now, as he's doing this, who shows? You hear the boom, boom, boom.
Pharisees.
Ooh, let's boo them. Boo.
Boo.
The Pharisees show up. Ooh, and we know about scribes and Pharisees. They are what?
Bad guys.
Bad guys. They're all wearing black hats. All wearing black hats. And what do they notice?
The disciples were eating unclean hands with unclean hands.
Now we have crossed over. The law has become almost ridiculous. Before they were objecting to the Sabbath, and we know about Sabbath and all this. But now, it's not even Jesus, it's the disciples are eating, and they haven't washed their hands sufficiently. Not unlike my wife and her little container of antibacterial. And when I'm pumping gas, I've gotten to a point, I pump gas. I handle money.
You have one in all your vehicles.
Oh, she carries them. Whether we can buy them by the gross, we have them everywhere, and that's good. I mean, that's really good. That's a good thing. That's a positive. But sometimes, just every now and then, she'll say, "You do want the antibacterial, don't you?" Yes, dear. All right, so they're eating with defiled hands. Now, Mark does something that's kind of interesting in verse 3. What does he do in verse 3? So he noticed they're eating with, without washing hands, right?
It's ceremonial washing.
He explains it, right? Which tells us immediately something about his audience. What does it tell us about Mark's audience that he has to explain it? What's going on with the scribes and Pharisees?
They don't understand.
They don't understand it. Mark's audience doesn't know about it. Which means Mark's audience is not made up of a lot of observant Jews. Because observant Jews, what? They would have known. Mark wouldn't have needed to define this ceremony. They would have known. But evidently Mark's audience doesn't know. this washing business, and washing cups and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, so what do they ask? What do the scribes and Pharisees ask?
Why don't you what is
Your
that?
disciples
Dis-
live according to the tradition of the elders.
Why on that? So before he doesn't say, why are they not washing their hands? He says, why are they not living
Tradition.
according to the tradition of the elders? Wow, that's kind of heavy. They just didn't use the antibacterial. And now he's bringing up what? The tradition of the elders. And by the way, does anybody know what the Greek word for elder used here is? Ooh. Presbytus.
Presbyterians.
Yes!
Oh my God.
Yes! Shocking, isn't it?
Yes.
Presbytus. We're governed by elders. That's why we're Presbyterian, because we're governed by elders. Okay, so the tradition of the elders, and then what does Jesus say in response?
He said that Isaiah was right when he prophesied about the hypocrites.
You are a bunch of hypocrites. And what makes you hypocrites? And he lays it right out. What makes you a bunch of hypocrites? And verse 8.
Oh, verse 8.
Yeah, go ahead. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to the traditions of men.
Now think about what that means. They are objecting to this hand washing thing, and they framed it as, you guys are rejecting the traditions of the elders. And Jesus is saying the tradition of the elders are what?
They're not.
They don't have authority.
They don't have authority.
Yeah.
They are not the commandments of God. They are the tradition of
Men.
men. Wow. Now, church later hears that. What is Jesus suggesting then to the church later?
You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions.
All of a sudden, the church later, you are now free from all these piddly little things. That the Jews, and remember, the Jews are the ones that are opposing the Christians way more than the Romans. The Romans don't even notice Christians. It's the Jews that are really on them, because they're, sort of a Jewish sect. All these little piddly rules that the Jews say you got to do. Jesus is saying, may not be the command of God. May not be the command of God. May be the traditions of people, which means you are now what? Free, right? And he explains it. How does he explain this? And the explanations is kind of difficult to follow. You kind of have to kind of take it into find the point, because it's a little convoluted about parents. You honor your parents, but you think you're doing something special in the sight of God when you do it, which means you're really not honoring them. So your focus isn't on them, your focus is on something else. The point is, you put human standards above God. You put human standards above God. And he's already told us about the Sabbath. What does God want with the Sabbath? What has he already told us when he was dealing with the Sabbath business? What did he say about the Sabbath?
To do good.
You do good on the Sabbath. That's what God wants you to do, because God made the Sabbath for who?
Us.
Us. He didn't make it as some kind of arbitrary, capricious thing to bind us to some piddly rules. God made it antibacterial for
Us.
Not as some weird thing that we've got to be bound to, which means my wife is right. That I need to clean my hands after handling money that people have sneezed on. That she is right, because it was made for us. It's not made to be worshipped as something crazy. And so what does he do with his disciples? Oh, even before that, what does he say in verse 14? Because he gives them a little parable, a mini parable.
It says, listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a man can make him unclean by going into him. Rather, it is what comes out of a man that makes him unclean.
That's a parable. That's a short, we think of parables, long stories about farming. But this is a little parable, one sentence parable. And the disciples don't understand it, right? And so, which means Mark wants us, the reader, to understand it. So they say, what does that mean? And how does Jesus explain the parable? How does Jesus explain this little parable? It's not what goes in a person that defines what comes out of a person. How does he explain that parable?
Well, I don't know. You don't want...
Well, how does he say it? What does he say to explain it?
Oh, just that what goes in.
Yeah, what comes from the outside, what you eat is not going to defile you.
Yeah,
your hands being dirty, eating out of a dirty plate, off a dirty plate, is not going to defile you because you take it in your mouth and what happens to it? I'm not a medical person, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm turning to a nurse. What happens when you eat something?
You really don't want to lecture on hydrochloric acid.
No, I probably don't. Can you dumb it down?
There's acid in your stomach.
Oh, and the acid. Oh. Okay. So there's acid in the stomach, and eventually it comes out of the. We don't need to.
No.
We don't need to go into that.
No, I think we all
I
understand.
think we all understand the coming out part. And because he says, in case you don't get it, it goes into the sewer. As opposed to the garbage disposal. And now Mark is kind of fascinating. Jesus says this, Mark interprets it. And this is one of the few times Mark himself will interpret, something Jesus says. Like he wants to make sure his church understands that in his mind, this is what Jesus was saying. And how does Mark interpret this thing? Doesn't matter what goes in a person, it just goes in the stomach. It's whatever the acid is, and then passes out, And Mark says, guys, you know what this means? What?
What comes out of a man is what makes him unclean.
Right, but even before that,
From all foods are okay.
he says what? What is it, Judy?
All foods.
All foods are clean. All foods are clean. And Mark interprets it. Fascinating. This story is in Matthew and Luke. Both in Matthew. Matthew and Luke don't include that. The fact that, this means all foods are clean. But that's Mark's interpretation of what's happening. So that's what Mark believes. Jesus is declaring all foods clean. Matthew and Luke disagree with Mark's interpretation. And we know Luke did because when you get to Acts, at the Apostolic Council in chapter 14 of Acts, deciding what to do, Luke, the council decides not all foods are clean because you shouldn't be eating carrion, you shouldn't be eating food with blood in it, you shouldn't eat food that's been sacrificed to idols. There's a list of foods you're not supposed to eat. So Luke does not believe all foods are clean. There are things you should avoid. Mark says what?
All
foods are clean. All foods are clean. That's his spin. I think if in a translation, probably should be parentheses around that. Because I think that's Mark's sort of insertion into the story. But from what Jesus continues, what does Jesus say? It's not what comes, it's what comes out of a person that is truly nasty. It's not what goes in. And what is it that, what is it that comes out of a person? What are some of the things that he says comes out of a person? Evil thoughts, theft, sexual immorality, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly,
greed.
In other words, a Rudiger family reunion. That's what you've got. Or a weekend with my sister.
All these evils come from inside and make a man unclean.
And make a person unclean. So it's what comes inside that comes out, not what's outside that comes in. Whoa. Now, if you wanted to take that and move into other areas. He's talking about food. You could take that in a lot of things. It's not, maybe not what we hear that's a problem. It's what we
Say.
that's a problem. Or what we do that's the problem.
Well, the saying, once it's out of your mouth, you can't take it back.
That's exactly right.
So,
I had a professor once tell us that he said, I envision the human mind as two rooms. He said, in one room you take in all kinds of stuff. You take it in. Some of it you take in and they get right out. It comes in, goes right out because it's stupid and you don't want it. So it goes right out. Other things you take in and you live with it for a little while. You process it, you think about it, and most of those go out too. Every now and then, some things that you allow into the
brain.
into the brain, yeah, and sticks, and that shapes who you are. And I think that may be kind of what he's saying here, not just with physical stuff, but maybe we shouldn't be afraid of what we hear. Maybe we should be more concerned about
what we say
and what we do. Maybe that should be our focus. A little more. Okay. Any questions? So this is more of the same. He's doing the same thing, establishing himself as the Christ. He's establishing himself the Christ. Next week we are going to finish the first half of Mark. Ooh. Well, that wasn't a lot of enthusiasm. I thought there'd be something. Jeez Louise, I'm giving you a woo. Okay, thank you, Shelley. Jeez Louise. What's that?
Mark's a good writer. He lets you interpret what he's...
Absolutely,
He
yeah.
makes the listener think.
I love Mark. Mark by far is my favorite. Just because he's so clean, the structure's so clean, and how he moves is, and I can kind of identify with Mark more so than the other three. The other three are important, but Mark just there's a straightforward. Mark is like an arrow. It's moving in the it's really clean. We know exactly where he's going, and I love his structure. I just think I think it's just a brilliant. But like I've told you before, if you read it in the Greek, it's a mess. Mark is a mess. He's a mess. The other evangelists are much better in their writing style. Mark is just a mess. It's awful. It's awful. But his ideas are brilliant. Okay, next week we're going to look at Mark 7:24 through 8:30. And that's going to take us right through Caesarea Philippi. So Peter's going to get Mark 7:24. And we're going to go to 8:30. And most of it is going to be more of the same. All of this first part is authority. Authority. A lot of preparing disciples in what they can expect when they go, we talked about that. But the main goal for Mark is to establish Jesus as the Christ. He's going to finish that by the time we get to the end of the 8th chapter. Then he starts part 2, where he starts developing who is Jesus as the Son of God, which will end in the end of chapter 15. So, okay, let's have a word of prayer, and then you can go do whatever you want. Just don't
go home and take in some food.
Take in some food, and you can eat anything you want. Yeah. Feel free to eat anything you want.
I stopped at Burger King on the way over.
Yeah, I think if anything will defile you, it's stuff from Burger King.
I don't usually eat there, but I was...
Hey, I like Burger King.
Yes, their jalapeno cheesy bites are really good.
Well, I just like the flame grill.
Oh.
Put it on. But I can't do it. I can't because I'm getting too fat. So I can't.
You don't want to be fluffy like me.
I don't want to be. Well, I'm fluffy enough. It's not whether I want to be fluffy. It's how fluffy am I going to be?
Yeah.
And since Coco got her hair cut, I feel like I'm the fluffy one. All right, let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together. Help us as we go about our living. Remind us that even when things seem really, really tough, and the world is unfair and hard and chaotic, that you're still here, that you're still with us. And we don't have reason to be afraid. We really don't. You're there. Also remind us that it's not the problems that we face, the real defilement isn't the stuff on the outside. It's the stuff on the inside. So if we want to exert a lot of attention, a lot of effort to control something, or work on something, let's work on what's on the inside. And the outside, may take care of itself. But help us to do that, because that's something we can actually do. Help us to do that in the name of Christ our Savior. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.